All right.
And I'm also going to take a few screenshots of our group here, because we get tired of the same ones and you love to look for your face in the set, right? So we'll update our meeting announcements with some new screenshots. If you don't want to be in there, blank out your video now and I'll take a couple. All right, let's do a few. Everybody smile.
That costs
Look at
extra.
the people on the second screen. Okay, one more. Everybody smile. All right, thank you.
Mayim, I see Rep. Meschino's joined us. So
Yay. So it's time to applaud for Rep. Meschino. Hey, join us.
No. Applaud for yourselves and all of the amazing advocacy work that you did. Not for me.
Well, I tried to get people to tell us what they felt we did in the last, how long's it been, Joan, since you filed that initial bill?
So, it's funny, I was actually speaking about this recently, and for me, this actually started in 2018. David Ismay from then Conservation Law Foundation came to my office probably about this time. It was maybe May, and he knew I was thinking about the next session and that I was looking for the plan, right? I'm a girl with a plan. I usually have a plan B, right? And so I was looking for what is the plan? And I was speaking with then Chairman Smizek, Frank Smizek, original author of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And, he was really walking me through sort of the backdrop of it all and sort of illuminating what the players and everything, because I was a first term representative at that point, and I was really trying to figure out where I should be spending time and putting in effort and energy. And and Chairman Smizek really sort of sat there with me, and then he introduced me to David. And we started a dialogue about, what are the levers that we need? What is the experience that we've had over the past 2 years with the Global Warming Solutions Act? What's working well? What's, what can we do better? And what do we need to fix? And what are those levers? And that conversation basically started 3 years ago. And we very much engaged stakeholders as a dialogue. And that was very, very important to me, because I don't think that you make these kinds of big transformative, legislative actions very often. And it was important that even if people didn't agree, that they were informed. And we went everywhere to like AIM and EEA and labor and the legislative leadership, and to the environmental community. And that was where we met you all. And it was, every step of it was about knocking on doors and finding a path in for people to understand what the roadmap was and why it was so important. And honestly, I just can't even imagine having to try to tackle that without Elders Climate Action. I just, and I think about like when I would be sitting in TV and you would all be there, very present, right? And T-shirts, right? Like, and regulars at these meetings, like all of the legislators on those committees know who you are because you were sitting there, and that consistency and that sort of direct messaging, keeping the message simple and just saying, this is important and you need to pay attention to it. How powerful was that? And then you guys took it on the road. And actually, and I think about all of the legislative lobbying that you did individually, one-on-one, going to each of your legislators and having those conversations. And I always laugh because I feel like it was Andy Vargas, who's young. He shouldn't have these problems, right? But he'd be like, someone would go into him and he'd be like, what, the roadmap? I don't know about this. And it's just that this is what it is. This is why it's important. This is why it needs to sit in front of your brain. This is, and we just pick up the phone and be like, oh, remember, gentle reminders, and all the legislative briefings we did. And all of that energy that you created brought people along, right? Because at the end of the day, we pass laws that are relevant, that are timely, and that are vetted. And that communication from ECA to legislators, really created that groundswell of activity. And, you can't do these things. I don't do this by myself. I am one person. Now I'm in the building and I have to manage that as a constituency. And there's outside the building and inside the building strategy, but you don't do these things by yourself. You do them with partners, and ECA has been a great partner. So I feel like you've been at the table right there every step of the way, and just bolstering me up and pushing me forward. And I must say, testing me a little bit, pushing me to do things like Zooms and and online stuff. And this isn't my comfortable space. Put me in the room. I'm happy, but put me online. I get, I see the little record button. I get nervous. Don't ask me why, but I really feel like you guys were very innovative. You were fearless. You leveraged all of your relationships. You stuck to the message, and you're just a fantastic partner. I'm not sure why you're giving me a round of applause. I think you should give yourself a round of applause. You guys are fabulous. So for my part, there you go. Or was it? Oh my gosh, wasn't it you guys? Who does the jazz hands in the committee hearings? Is that, or that might be 350? I don't know, or Mom's out front, but like I love the jazz hands. So yeah. So anyway,
Joan, what you forgot to say was we may have been a team for you, but you had to be our coach, and we wouldn't have succeeded without your coaching. And you gave us coaching several times a month, and it was terrific.
I think, and it was fun. I mean, it was so great. Just like I said, I'm a girl with a plan. So it was, my absolute pleasure and joy to work with you, and especially at the end, right, when it was, it's a marathon, right? And you just have to get to the end. And I think about all the time, like, just kind of waiting, and Lord help us, who would have thought COVID, right? I mean, we almost had it on the floor, and then COVID. So I mean, I feel like everything that could have happened to us did, and we rolled with it, and it was all successful, and it was all worth it. So go ahead, please, Michael.
Oh, I just wanted to add just a second of, in this mutual admiration pep talk that we're having here. But Joan, your willingness and your skill at being the leader, at being the point person, at being the person who brought it across the line. I mean, yeah, we were there, and many others were there, blocking and tackling and pushing and doing all those other sports metaphor things, which I'm not very good at, really. But you had the guts, to take the heat and to win. We are carrying you around on our shoulders.
Oh, thank you. I don't mean to minimize my own role or to diminish. It's a ton of work. It really was. I was just texting John, like, wait, remind me, what am I doing here? I actually took Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday off, if you can believe it, finally. I took a little time off. But it's, it's well worth it. And, I think when you build a good team, you have good partners, then work, it's hard to call it work, right? But you're right. I mean, I definitely took it on the chin more than a couple of times. I did come perilously close to stalking the chairman. But surely there are retired lawyers here that would have come and bailed me out. But it, and I'm being funny and I'm jesting, but I think we had, right from the drafting of this bill, it was about understanding the key levers that we needed to make the Global Warming Solutions Act effective and efficient and fair, right? It's also that equity lens, the social justice lens, and environmental justice lens that needed to be in there. I think that's actually probably the single most important piece of that bill, was building that framework and requirements to assess against social justice, equity, and environmental justice. But, you know, we really did, we had our plan and we stuck to it. And that's not to say we didn't adapt along the way, but, you know, we definitely, I think we read the tea leaves right and we worked it. And it's a lot of hard work. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my legislative aide, Colette Medulla, who just was wonderful, and for, you know, such a bright young professional. And I, you know, really just have such a strong partner in my own office. And it was just delightful to watch such a terrific young woman just blossom and really step into that role. And you know, she just knocked it out of the park. So, and you know, legislators take credit. We never really always turn back and remember our staff, but boy, she was really fantastic. And she has, as you all know, left us to pursue graduate studies. And of course, I picked an equally fabulous young professional in John Hamilton, my current aide. So yeah, so it's all good. And then I just, so everyone knows, I did, so as we were coming down, obviously Speaker DeLeo, we had his ear and his support throughout. And as he was exiting at the end of the session, it was really a wonderful, delightful surprise. You know, we just had no reason to think one way or the other. The now speaker, Ron Mariano, really got it. He understood it. And he also understood politically where we were at. And I thought it was really tremendous leadership on his part to say, no, we just voted that and we are doing it. Thank you kindly. And to see that, to help us see it across the line. So we actually ended up voting on this 4 times. And I tell you, that last one, we vote by phone. That's how we do it. So we're all watching on the screen and we can see, but we're hearing and listening, and we vote in small clusters by phone. And I will confess to you that I was like, yes, that last one was like, yes, you know, I was so excited. So that was really great. And I did, you know, I did go in to the signing. I didn't get invited. I had to invite myself, but I did go in for the signing. And honestly, that was a really special moment. And I did ask them to send one of the pens to Frank Smisek. As one of the original authors. So, but now, of course, it's time to do the work.
Nice.
Yeah, so, you know, I hope everybody is following where we're at with the 2030 CECP. The roadmap itself is done, and they did it in anticipation of the bill that was actually passed, because that was very much, I mean, obviously David Ismay was a primary author. He was the guy they hired to do that work. And so he, you know, very much did it in the way that we were anticipating, and that the law was coming out. So that piece, that technical document, is in place. And now I'm sure you're all following through the implementation committee, but then also through EEA with the 2030 plan. The secretary did address I'm back on telecom, utility, energy as a committee member, and the secretary did address us privately recently, and just to get some of the new members up to date. And you know, they paused that process to align the 2030 plan with some of the changes that came through the legislative process, you know, between House and Senate, and then also between the legislature and the governor. So they will resume that public input process shortly, and you will see them align it a little bit more closely. But we are still going to have to be vigilant. We're still going to have to press them. We're still going to have to continue. You know, the government does what we tell it to do. So we're really going to have to make sure that we stay at the table every step of the way, and look for the policy opportunities that they're going to need to put in place. So part of that will be things like, you know, looking ahead to what legislation has been filed by my colleagues, I've seen some of it. Nothing's really hit the committees yet. So it's just what I've come across through people asking for co-sponsorships. And before I say another word, I have co-sponsored almost nothing. So just because you don't see my name on something, don't think anything other than I just haven't quite gotten there. Lawyer, right? You pushed the deadline back, and then you made it soft. So what did anyone ever expect I would do? So, but John's he has a plan to get me back on track to some of the co-sponsorships. But anyway, so we will see some of those come to the committee soon. And from what I've been hearing from some of my colleagues, is some really interesting legislation coming up this session. And some of it that's really just going to need to be put in place to further the sort of the strategies that the Baker administration is putting out there. Some of it that's even advancing ahead of it, that's this really interesting and cool and neat. Things like Bill Driscoll put forward the carbon pricing piece as an economic development bill, which I thought was brilliant. There's definitely a couple of 100% renewable bills in there, which I haven't read to see what the differences are yet, but it's exciting to see people in that space. There's definitely, like Lori Ehrlich's, the Futures Act, and different things like that. Looking at the actual transitions, I myself put forward some bills, and I'm working with Rep. Barber on electrification of vehicles, investing in infrastructure, the fleets bill, MBTA. I did the mandate that we wouldn't have any new registrations after 2035 of internal combustion, so we cut it off their engine. But then also the Rep. Hecht, the former Rep. Hecht's bill for investing in the infrastructure for electrification. I'm just thinking, I'm forgetting the program. But then we also, and there's a series of bills there. There's also a number of us that have filed bills in the decarbonization of heating of building. Oh, more EV, thank you, John. The decarbonization of how we heat buildings. So we did a somewhat comprehensive, a pretty comprehensive bill on that. And I've noticed that a number of my other colleagues have also put stuff in that space as well. So, and there's a whole lot more. So it's, we're waiting for the committees, for the bills to come to the committee so we can take a look. Other ones that I'll just note that aren't going to come to before our committee: recycling. Michelle Sokola would take a real look at that one, because of course recycling and extended producer responsibility actually does speak to a lot of our climate needs and problems, and how we'll figure out solutions. And then there's also the Food Systems Caucus, which is doing a lot of work as well. And so there's some really interesting things going on there. And then the only other one I wanted to highlight to you, and it's called an Access to Justice. I filed it with Rep. Modero, and he and I think about it as an environmental justice bill, but it's really an access to justice bill. And what it does is it would create the right of an individual in Massachusetts to bring a claim for disparate impact, which is just government discrimination, against an individual. You could bring that in a state court. And so it's meant to provide access to the courts now that we have environmental justice laws. And I did recently speak on a panel with Rep. Dubois, and she's refiling some of the other components of EJ that didn't come through. So there'll be a little bit more work on the toxicity pieces there for her to do and stuff. So it's actually pretty exciting. And I think some of the other things I saw someone throw in the chat, we'll be looking at some of the RPS regs coming back through. TV only has an oversight, but it's an important function. So we're hoping that the chair will take a look at that. I did see that they pulled the permit, or that they nixed the permit on the Palmer plant, which I know is important to a lot of you. And then what's just one other thing I was trying to think of? Oh, I'm sorry, my brain. But anyway, so looking forward, it's now that the 2050 roadmap is signed, I feel like I can finally look forward towards the advocacy for my own bills. And I actually think it's going to be an exciting session. We have a new chair who's super smart and clearly absorbing it and really immersing himself in this subject matter. And honestly, I really think that what we really need to do is make sure that everyone's thinking about what's the climate bill that we're going to put forward to this year, right? Not we did one last year, you wait your turn. Now it's going to be, all right, we got the big regulatory schemas in place and a lot of the key components in there, and now it's about how we're just gonna move it forward. So yeah, what will be the big thing this year? So I'm pretty excited about the session. And I know you guys keep popping stuff into the chat, but I haven't really been able to look at it yet. But did you want me to go back to the chat, or did you want to ask me any questions? Or
Joan, first again, I'd like to just express my appreciation for your leadership and advocacy and everything that you've done this past session, and look forward to working with you in this session and future sessions. But I do have one just sort of overriding question. I mean, as you said, I mean, now we've got the roadmap bill in place, and now we've got to get it done. One aspect of that, I mean, biggest is all of the new bills that have been filed this session. But the other piece, and one that I've been working on, is how do we bring this message to our own community, to our own town? And I've been contacting all of the state agencies I can think of to see if they have a slide deck or a presentation or can send a representative to tell our select board or our planning board, here's what you can expect in the next few years and, through 2030. And, so far I haven't been able to find either, something in a presentation form or someone who raises their hand and said, yeah, I'll come out to Stowe and tell your select board what's happening. Because, we're sort of in this sort of small group, and, amazing as it may seem, we talk to our select board. They don't know that this, what's happening here. So I don't know if you have any advice as to how, just generally, how we can bring this message home. Because now, someone called this, climate change 2.0. I think it really is, in a sense, because now it's going to affect our homes. It's going to affect our transportation in ways that everything that's been done beforehand hasn't. So people have to know.
I think so you're asking exactly the right question. And I'm going to answer it in two ways. I think, first of all, there's also action on the state level, right? And the question that I asked Secretary Theorides when she met with the committee was, how are you integrating this across all of your secretariats, right? So does Secretary Keneally have a plan on how to address, for DHCD or for economic development or for Secretary Tesler, for the MBTA and transportation and MassDOT, and how is that going to intersect? And it was interesting, she says very much an internal dialogue that they led, and that now that they have key officers in each division, each secretariat, that's going to be basically their go-to climate person, which I thought was really interesting, because that's a good sign. If you make it an extra thing in somebody else's busy day, then nothing happens. But if you hire somebody to actually do it, then that shows an investment. So I think we should be watching not just the budget, right, because that's also spending, but we should be watching to see, who's emerging as that person on the state level. Now, as the municipal level, it's interesting to see a lot of local climate action committees are springing up across the board. So it just happened. You all know the fabulous Laura Burns, who's my good friend and my partner in crime on this, has been leading the Hingham Net Zero. And what's been really amazing is she doesn't even have to lead it. She just had to sort of inspire it. And people are very much taking forward both the commitment to town meetings for net zero, and then, you know, seeking plans to sort of do these kinds of things at the local level. And one of the key reasons that becomes important is through the Green Communities Act and the MVP, which is Municipal Vulnerability Planning, I think, program. And so essentially, the Baker administration, I don't know if they intended to do it this way or if this was like a happenstance responsive to sort of the resiliency and adaptation piece. But every community has already done the assessments. And, you know, some I'm sure have done it better than others, but everyone has done those assessments. And the way, once they do that, then that opens them up and makes them available, eligible for grants. And the grants, traditionally what the Baker administration has done has pushed these things out into grant programs to the community. So we'll definitely have to think about equity and which groups and towns and regions are better at availing themselves of these kinds of projects and how we make sure the money gets down to everybody at the local level. But I think that's going to be one of the big pieces is a lot of these grants are going to become open to the munis. And then what they're going to do is they're either going to comply or they're not. And people will either call for it or they won't. And so it's going to be a checkbox. Have you thought about, you know, is your building going to be passive? Or is it going to be, you know, are you using solar panels? Are you doing like all these things? And so what you're going to see is those eligibility criteria is going to drive things like the school building assistance program or the library building program or, you know, vehicle purchases that are eligible. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot happen at the local level. And in most communities, right, set aside the cities, but in most communities, you know, the biggest actor in that space is usually town government. And that sets a lot of the sort of tenor and tone for it. I've seen it pop up in different ways, but they all tend to be these local climate action groups that are calling for it. And they're pushing town meeting to spend money and to make commitments. And it's all around the procurement. So everything from what's, you know, how are we heating this building to what police cars are we buying? So it's actually a very exciting time. And I think that the enthusiasm at that local level, that calling for it is what's going to make it really successful. So I don't know if that really answered your question completely, Arnie, but.
Thanks, Joan. That's great. We've got in our own little town, we've got 3 big developments in the work, and we're trying to work with our planning board to, you know, to make these new homes all electric, and, you know, to get some support from the state to say, boy, you know, you really better do this because this is where we're headed. So that was sort of.
That's zoning, the stretch code and the net zero energy stretch code is going to become really critically important. So that is the key piece of the bill that I filed. I know others have filed similar pieces. I think it's Maria Robinson was more on like an energy stretch code, and then, but so there's some really interesting pieces around that. And in the ultimately, in the roadmap, it ended up being an opt-in, which is actually not a bad way to start because municipalities don't like to be told what to do. So it's actually not a bad way to do it. And it's not a piece that's an eligibility criteria for the green communities, but it, you know, we'll work on getting that last piece in this session and see if we can't do that, because that's going to be an important component of it. And I saw the question about the eligibility criteria in the chat. So we already have green communities, which has really taken us a long way down this path already. And I think what we're going to see is that they're trying to figure out how to get everybody into the Green Communities Act. So we have to figure out like the MLP piece too, municipal light plans. But they're already starting to head down that path with the eligibility criteria. And if your planning board your town looks at some of those grant options, you know, those are check boxes, and, you know, this is competitive stuff. So, you know, the further we go, the more stringent, or not stringent, it's not the right word, but the more we guide towards these kinds of eligibility pieces. We don't want to go so far that we're precluding people or making it hard for them. We want to kind of bring them in and get them heading down that path where they go pretty naturally. So it's a balance. You don't want to push people out and have municipalities fall behind either. So, but yeah, they're already thinking about it. And it was, I'll just pause and say too, it was delightful to talk to the secretary, and Commissioner Woodcock was there, Commissioner Chan was there, and they're excited about this stuff. Like, to actually hear them talk about the work that they're doing. Even DPU has started down these paths. So, so I think it's really exciting. Oh, I remember the thought I had. I think the person we should be approaching about sort of what's next is maybe Commissioner Chang. She's I really feel like DOER is the one that should be putting out the exact and really that roadshow piece, if you will. So maybe that's a call to her. Maybe we should make that as one of our task lists and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Joan. I reached out to one of her folks, and that's a great idea to reach out to her directly. And I don't know, maybe your office could say, we're getting requests for, for community outreach, and how can you help? Yeah.
Yeah. No, and in fact, I've been invited to speak like this in a couple of spots, and as we're having this dialogue, I'm making some notes for myself about the information that we really should be asking for, and what kinds of things we can be doing to see. You're already helping again hone the message and the information, and I think that's an important piece of it. So yeah, we'll definitely start to interact more with their office and what have you. So excited. So yeah. Oh my gosh. So now I'm just looking. It's like Tina Graskowski. Hi. Oh, Roger. Oh my gosh. And BJ. And oh my gosh. Rick. I see everyone. I was to say, so nice to see everybody. Alan. Yeah. So anyway.
Thank you so much, Joan. And we're really grateful that you took time and to come today. And we're going to take all of this and move forward, looking at those bills today, and have a presentation that Arnie's going to give. So I'm going to jump in and say thank you so much
Awesome.
for taking time for coming
Would you
today.
guys do me a favor? And so I was just trying to glance through the chat, and John's probably noticed some of them, but if you wanted to like grasp all of the information from the chat and send that to us, if there's pieces of information we can, or short answers or things like that, we can toss back to you. John and I will definitely try to do that.
Can I suggest to everybody to unmute yourself to say a loud thank you to Joan, and thank you for coming?
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Joe.
Joan.
Thank you very much. Awesome job.
We look forward to
job.
continuing to work with you. And some of those questions in the chat, people are going to go ahead and contact you about those.
Oh, great.
There
Yeah.
were some details people want to get into, and yeah.
Yeah. And my office hours are always on Monday afternoon. So, we can always schedule time to chat on Mondays or Fridays are usually the best days. So for one-on-one or small groups, that'd be great too. So yeah. Alrighty, well, I'll let you guys talk amongst yourselves. It's so awesome to be with you, and just really thank you. You're my grassroots heroes.
Aw, thank you.
Wow.
So we'll talk soon.
We'll keep on working.
Alrighty. Oh yeah, don't you dare abandon me. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, take it away, Arnie. I think is up
All
next.
right, I'm going to share screen and get back to the top of this. Are people seeing this first slide here? So okay, great.
Yes.
So what I'm going to do is just do a real quick overview of the legislation that we've just been talking about. And then just at a very high level, provide an overview of where we need to go now that we have the next generation roadmap bill. And then we're going to be turning it over to talk in more detail about legislation for this session. So I think we've already been through this slide. As you know, the roadmap bill, which is also S9, bounced back and forth between the legislature and the governor. Joan said 4 times. I thought it was 3 times. It may have been. But the governor finally passed it, or finally signed it 2 weeks ago. And so we now have it enacted in law. So now in my mind, now the hard part comes. Now we really have to get it done. So I'm just going to really do a top level overview of what is in the roadmap bill, by area in the overall target for emissions. What we did do is we enacted into law a limit of net zero emissions by 2050. You're probably aware the governor a little over a year ago through executive order had set that limit as well, but this now enshrines it in law, and so this is something that the next governor, whoever he or she may be, can't disassociate him or herself from. And just to remind you that the net zero emissions is what it means. It doesn't mean zero emissions. It means we have to reduce our statewide emissions by a minimum of 85% by 2050. And then that balance of 15% or up to 15%, depending on how much further we get, can be achieved through sequestration. And if you attended our last climate presentation, we talked in some detail about that. The limits are now set every 5 years. The administration had it every 10 years. You probably are aware that there was the law establishes a 50% emissions reduction limit by 2030 relative to our 1990 baseline, which is what all of our emissions are measured against with the Global Warming Solutions Act, and that there had been a real tussle between the administration and the legislation, where the administration had asked for a 45% reduction. The other difference in the overall emissions limit is that in the law, not only do we have a statewide emissions limit every 5 years, but within that statewide emissions limit are sector-based emissions limits. The one thing to note about that is that they are not binding so long as the overall emissions limit target is met. A major component that was included in the bill is environmental justice. It codifies in law what is meant by an environmental justice population, mandates public involvement from the EJ communities, and also requires an EJ impact report for projects in or near EJ communities. In the clean energy field, just at a top level, I did see there was a question in the chat about the RPS. That did get increased between the years of 2025 and 2030 from 2% to 3%. The net result of that meaning that we need to have 40% RPS qualified electricity by 2030. Now, you probably also know that there's another metric called CES, Clean Energy Standard. So the combination of the RPS and the CES gets us actually to 60% by 2030 as a minimum for our clean electricity. There's an additional procurement for offshore wind of 2,400 megawatts, which is very large, where we will have a very substantial capacity of offshore wind, including the procurements already underway and those authorized in the bill. Another very important achievement of the bill is for the first time it brings the municipal light plants into the fold, and they've agreed to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. They have different metrics that they are not subject to the RPS as the large investor-owned utilities are, but still they are now, part of the statewide mission to get us to net zero emissions. And there's an additional incentives for solar in low-income households. We talked about this a little bit with Joan. There's a opt-in stretch code, energy stretch code by late 2022. The bill does not have a date, by which municipalities need to opt in, or by which time the whole state has to adopt these sometimes called net zero stretch codes. And actually Joan has filed a bill that does establish dates for that. But at this point, the definition of what we mean by a net zero stretch code is in the bill, and that definition has to be fleshed out by late 2022. There's other very important provisions in appliance efficiency. A very one that I think is really important, will become more so as we move forward, is a plan for natural lands. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Stricter requirements for gas safety, requirement that Mass Save, that you're probably familiar with, include emissions reductions in its goals. Up till now, it has primarily been looking at energy savings, which is important, but may not necessarily correlate well with emissions reduction. And also authorizes this sort of exciting new pilot project for utility scale renewable thermal energy for building, heating, and cooling. And that's also called geo micro districts, which is a term you may have heard before. Now I'm going to move on to the challenge ahead for the next 10 years. The slide or the illustration at the bottom of the slide is cut and paste from the Clean Energy and Climate Plan, or the 2030 CECP. And one of the things I really wanted to point out in this, it breaks down the emissions reduction targets by sector. And I hope you can see my cursor here, but it's very interesting to look at where we started from in 1990 in the various sectors. That's our baseline year. Where we were in 2017, which is the last year that the state has complete data for our emissions inventory, and where we're targeted to be in 2030 by sector. So you can see in the electricity sector, we made very, very significant progress. There's less than half of the emissions coming from the generation of electricity today as there was in 1990. But in the transportation and building sector, we've made little or no progress between 1990 and 2017. That's probably also true for today. Transportation sector, no progress. The building sector, modest progress, but actually that was primarily due from folks retrofitting their old fuel oil furnace or boiler to natural gas. And we know that's not the direction we want to be headed in. So the interesting thing to look at here is what are the targets for 2030? So we do have a significant additional emissions reduction in the electricity sector from where it is today to where it needs to be in 2030 to be on track. But the two major ones are transportation and buildings. In buildings, you can see that the target is to essentially cut in half our emissions between today and 2030, and a less dramatic but still very, very aggressive target for transportation. And that's going to translate to in approximately 1 million electric cars in the state, EVs, and 1 million homes retrofit to using primarily heat pumps by 2030. So 1 million homes is more than a third of the households in the state. 1 million electric cars is about 20% of the registered vehicles in the state. So this is why, from my perspective at least, this is where this is really going to start to impact us all. That in a town like mine, as I was mentioning to Joan, we've really got to make sure that folks are aware that this is coming down the road, and that many of the homes and vehicles in town in 2030 are going to have some real changes take place. So I think that's why, from my perspective at least, I like to think of this as really the Global Warming Solutions Act 2.0. This is where we all need to get involved, both at the community level and each of us as residents of the state. And here's what we did internally in looking at legislative priorities is look at those areas where we thought the largest impact could be made in achieving those targets that we just looked at for the CECP. Obviously, funding is going to be a major hurdle for us. We'll talk about that. And the rest of the bullets there, I'm going to leave for Roger to speak to as we start to talk about our legislative priorities for this legislative session. So I'm going to stop share and turn it back.
Thank you, Arnie, so much. That was great information, really succinct. And I'm Tina Grasowski on the legislative team. We're going to take a 1-minute stretch break here. 1 minute. Get up, stretch your bodies, stop sitting. It's the new smoking. And take a few steps, come back, and Roger will head us into our new look at the legislative bills. Come back, please, in 1 minute. Okay, everybody. Roger, are you ready to jump in here?
I am ready, but I wonder if anybody had any questions for Arnie before I take off. I didn't see any in the chat, but any questions for Arnie?
I just had a couple of points, Roger, that
Yeah,
might supplement what Arnie is saying. He mentioned the emission reduction mandates. I just wanted to reinforce how important it is that the bill didn't change the enforceability of these deadlines. They are legally enforceable and binding, subject to lawsuits if these emissions reductions are not achieved. And this is going to be a major challenge for the Commonwealth. But I'm very happy to see that the legislature didn't change that. Now, at any point in time, if the state gets in a real bind, watch how quickly the legislature changes that. We need to keep an eye on that. And just one other little point, we keep talking about these deadlines, 2025, 2030. I've now, I believe, verified that the date we really need to focus on is December 31st of those years. So when we talk about achieving a certain emissions reduction by 2025, it's December 31st of that year. So we've got, in some ways, in my mind, it seems like an extra year. We need that because we've pretty much lost a year here as a result of the change in law this bill has brought us in planning.
okay, great. Hearing no other questions for Arnie, let me move on quickly to initially review the process that our legislative team included BJ for much of the time and Tina and Arnie, the process that we went through in selecting bills. Paul Riesberg actually joined us at the end, provided tremendous input on transportation issues. But let me actually back up one here. Our focus, which we presented actually at our last meeting, I'm going to review this very quickly for you. We really focused on the Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2030. Now, I think as Arnie and others have mentioned, that's going to need to be revised to reflect the new roadmap bill and some of the requirements that will mean the Clean Energy and Climate Bill have to be revised. So we're waiting for that to get done. But nevertheless, our feeling on the legislative team, and I think in the organization, is that Clean Energy and Climate Plan was pretty much on target for what we needed to be doing, and actually very aggressive and ambitious in many cases. So we kind of took that as our tool for setting goals and looking for legislation that would support what they're trying to do with the CECP, and that remains true now. In particular, the focus is on funding, as Arnie mentioned, and we're going to need to be paying attention to legislation that leads us down that road and other means and approaches to providing the funding that's needed. I think Joan mentioned that some towns will be stepping up. There are other sources of funds, some in the legislation, but we particularly looked at funding, but also non-financial issues. We need legislation to do things like Joan mentioned, to stop the sales of internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035. So the CECP wasn't very clear on what legislation and regulations would be needed, but a lot of the legislation that's been filed this session speaks directly to some of the things that need to be implemented in order to get the CECP underway. In addition, we looked for bills that support environmental justice goals, and especially those that have a very direct link with climate change. EJ can cover a lot of different ground and areas, and we looked at all of them, including civil rights issues, but paid particular attention when there is a bill that affects EJ community climate change issues. So that was another one of our criteria. The fourth one is we look to our allies and their support for various bills whenever possible. Clearly, it's very helpful to have a team who's backing a particular bill. So we paid a lot of attention to what our allies were looking to as priority legislation. And finally, we looked at bills that we thought had some reasonable chance of actually getting through, getting past this legislative session, to avoid too much pie in the sky if possible. So those were our key drivers for looking through the bills initially. And here's the process that we used. We gathered information from all of our allies as much as possible, and several of them were a few steps ahead of us, fortunately. And we tried to keep in touch and gather their input on bills that they were setting as priorities, first priorities, second priorities. And you can see we had a pretty long list of allies, and there's some others that aren't on there and that will join us, we believe. But we do try to keep our radar out there, looking for recommendations for bills from folks that we trust, coming from a variety of different sectors. And so that was pretty important to us. We also searched the legislative database for climate-related bills. And so we were pretty thorough and kind of really digging deep into the 7,000 bills, looking for those that might be relevant to climate. Eventually, we compiled about 250 bills on a spreadsheet. And then we didn't review all of them. Time was limited. We tried to review the most relevant and promising ones based on just the bill title, looking at the allies who were supporting the bills already, and then looking at our own priority criteria. We ranked bills as 0, meaning these were the ones we wouldn't support, 1 as a priority bill for us, for which we put in a lot of energy, and 2, a bill that we would support, but investing fewer resources and less energy of our organization. In our initial sweep, we came up with 8 number 1 priority bills, and you shortly are going to hear a lot about those, and we're going to gather some input from you all, what you think about that initial selection of 8 priority bills. Most of them are, again, focused on the clean energy climate plans, but there are some others focusing on EJ and some education issues. So some interesting things that you'll see in there. Now that still left us with 53 secondary or number 2 bills. And that's we've taken our first pass through those. We'll be taking other passes through those down the road. And at the end of this discussion, we'll let you know how we're going to get you guys to help weigh in on some of those secondary priorities. So just to let you know, what does it mean to be primary or secondary? So for a first priority bill, the legislative team is committed to tracking these regularly on a weekly or monthly basis as often as possible to determine where it stands, where it's going, what input's needed, where is advocacy need to be applied, really stay on top of those bills and help them move along. We'll assist with soliciting co-sponsors where needed, and calling on members to check in with their legislators looking for co-sponsorship. And we'll be organizing appropriate lobbying efforts involving just us or us and our allies. So a lot of resources put into the first priority bills. For a second tier or second priority bill, less energy applied here. We'll try to maintain awareness of what's going on with the bill, connecting in particular with our supporters and relying on other supporters who may see it as a higher priority to really lead the charge and fill us in on what's happening. There'll be things like sign-on letters coming from other supporters that we can jump in and share. There may be targeting lobbying efforts that other supporters are setting up and that we could easily join into potentially. It's possible that we could have more engagement if there are members who really feel there's some bills that are on the secondary list that they feel very strongly about. They may want to take on a little more careful tracking and bring to the organization some thoughts about what might need to be done for those bills. So that. Okay, so after we finish a review of our first priority bills, I'm going to come back to you and talk a little bit about how we might manage figuring out what to do with the second priority. But now I'm going to turn it back to Tina, stop my share. And actually, I'm going reshare and bring up our spreadsheet. Let me just make sure we can do that. Let's see.
So while Roger is bringing up the spreadsheet, you can see all, and we're going to, I'd like to give a shout out to Roger because give Roger a big round of applause because he put together this spreadsheet. We all chipped in, but it was really Roger who's been, Roger's baby. He's been managing it. And this is how we're going to keep track of these bills. So when he brings them up, we'll start with the first one.
Okay.
And go through the 8. And we're going to take turns to go over the bill, review it briefly so that you can see and learn about these 8 bills.
Okay, I think I really see the spreadsheet.
I think you need to increase that. Make it larger, please.
Oh,
Not a lot. It's covering my entire screen
Yeah.
right now. If people are in standard view, they can actually enlarge their view of this by dragging over the edge of the screen.
Okay.
It should be. It's filling my. If it fills the screen, it's pretty readable with bold type and fairly large type, I think.
Okay. So we'll start with the first bill on the spreadsheet. You can see on the left, the far left, number 1, that's just the categories across the top. So the actual first bill is bill number 2 there. And that is buildings, which is, I believe Arnie is going to review for us.
Thanks, Tina. So what we did do for all of these bills that were filed this session is put them into what we called a type. And in the building sector, as you saw when we went over the targets for 2030 in the CECP, we have a very, very aggressive target of halving the building emissions between now and 2030. We also wanted to limit ourselves to the number of first priority bills in each of the sectors. So it was a tough job to try to figure out of the probably several dozen bills that have been filed in the building sector, which one we would consider to be our top priority. And the one we selected is, you can see the bill number on the left. It's both a House and Senate bill. Our Representative Joan Meschino is the sponsor on the House side. ELM and MAPC are also supporters or very active in advocating for this bill. The thing that really attracted us to this particular bill is it looked to us like as close to an omnibus bill for the building sector as we found within all of the building bills that have been submitted this session. It does include the stretch code that we talked about earlier. It also incorporates a date now for adopting that stretch code, which I think I mentioned earlier is not in the climate bill that just got passed. And by the way, this is a very, very top level overview of this bill. There's a link there for more information, or of course, there's also a link to the bill itself. It does establish a mechanism and funding for retrofitting existing buildings. We both need to, any new construction that we have from now through 2050, needs to be what we call 2050 compliant. But, the elephant in the room is obviously our existing buildings. That's 80% or more of the buildings that will be in 2050 are already the buildings that have been built. And those will need to undergo, a combination of improvements to what's called their thermal envelope. And some of them will need to undergo what's called deep energy retrofits, as well as being, for the most part, retrofit from fuel oil or gas to, for the most part, electricity. Finally, one important thing it does is we continue to have within some of our incentive programs, in particular Mass Save, there is state incentives and funding for switching, for example, from fuel oil to natural gas, or for switching from a less efficient to a more efficient fuel oil furnace or boiler. And looking ahead, over the next 10 years and through 2050, that makes no sense whatsoever. So we're going to be, this bill, if enacted, would remove those incentives. So that's a high-level overview of the bill that we're prioritizing in the building sector.
Mhm.
Great, thank you, Arnie. And then the next one is the Green Futures Act. I believe, are you going to review that one as well?
Sure. So the Green Futures Act is sometimes called a market-based compliance mechanism or a carbon fee bill. It is what we are looking for here, and as we mentioned earlier, is we need funding to accomplish all our targets for 2030. This is a bill that is being sponsored by Representative Driscoll, Climate Exchange, and some of you may know Tim Cronin really led the charge from a grassroots climate organization focus on this particular bill. It takes what was called the Benson bill from last session, refines it, updates it, will, by our estimation, provide $10 billion of funding by 2030 through various so-called market-based compliance mechanisms on all fossil fuels. So that includes transportation, heating, electricity, and industry. And then takes those funds and invest them in meeting those emissions targets that we talked about for the Clean Energy and Climate Plan, creates funding for statewide green infrastructure, provides aid for local communities, workforce development, which we will talk about a little bit later, which is absolutely key to achieving our targets. We don't have the trained workforce in building renovations or transportation or energy that is going to be needed over the next 10 years, and provides a significant percentage of the funds collected to vulnerable residents. So again, that's just a very top level overview of this bill, but we think it's a good bill, and we think it's one that we really need to work for this time to make sure that or help make the targets for 2030 a reality.
Tina, did you want to take any questions for Arnie before you jump into your bills?
Sure. Any questions for Arnie?
I have a question.
Who's
Yes.
that?
Michael Sales here. Yeah, so Arnie, I'm trying to understand on the first priority bill, 3593, you said that it curtails incentives. Did I hear that correctly? Fossil fuel systems remove state funding for switching among fossil fuel systems. Is that indicating that we're taking away incentives for switching to natural gas and that's a good thing? Or are incentives for heat pumps and other non-fossil fuel sources, energy sources being removed? I'm a little confused about that.
Okay, sorry, it's confusing, but but yeah, your first statement is correct. So, we currently, through the Mass Save program and other programs in the state, actually, provide assistance for, both commercial and residential building owners to switch, for example, from fuel oil to natural gas for heating and hot water. So this would remove those incentives, as well as providing additional incentives for switching to heat pumps and other non-emitting forms of energy that, for heating and hot water primarily.
Thank you, Arnie. Any other questions?
I have one. So Arnie, Benson's bill was, if I recall, like 80% of the carbon pricing got refunded and 20% went for investment. Have they gotten rid of that 80%? Is it all being invested, or is there still a split?
There's a split, and I wish there's actually a pie chart. If you go, I didn't put the link in here. There's a good one-page fact sheet that I will try to remember to send out that shows how that $10 billion will be distributed, at least in the bill. It might, change as things go along, but I believe, actually, I'm not sure what the percentages are for, the dividends to vulnerable residents versus investment in infrastructure and community development. I think there is it's a very substantial amount of that funding is going to go as dividends, primarily to low-income residents. I could throw out a number, but I hate to be wrong, so I'm not going to. But it is very substantial. But over half will be invested in targeting and meeting the limits for emissions in the CECP. So I think it tries to do a good job of both investing directly in meeting our targets for the CECP, as well as being equitable, for those populations that will be facing somewhat higher bills for things like gasoline and fuel oil and natural gas.
Great, thank you. I think we should move on unless there's any really demanding questions. One thing I'd like to point out is that all the numbers that you see on the left of the bill numbers that say House HD is House and SD is Senate, they're all going to be changed when the bills move out of the clerk's office into committees. And that's what Joan was referring to this morning when she said she hasn't seen any of the bills in committee yet. So these numbers will all be changed, and we'll be tracking that and making sure as we work together to get the correct numbers as they move forward. So the next bill is an exciting educational bill. An act to promote energy and economic resilience through clean energy, education, and job pathway programs. It's essentially to build a vocational technical education program to fund high schools to develop workforce training, job placement in clean energy technologies and industry. It provides funding from the Department of Public Utilities and electric gas companies, municipal aggregators to put money towards this educational program, because as we know and continually being reminded of, that we're going to need a workforce and need to put people to work to get us to where we need to be for the clean energy. So that's the educational bill. And we included this because we thought that was important. The next bill, an act relative to energy facility siting reform to address environmental justice, climate, and public health. You can see we have quite a few other allies supporting this bill, Climate Exchange, which is Tim Cronin's organization, Environmental League of Massachusetts, an environmental justice table that has many organizations, MCAN, Community Action Network, Mass Power Forward, and 350. So this bill essentially is important because this is our bill that is really representing environmental justice in communities so that they have more of a seat at the table with the siting board to consider environmental implications and impacts, greenhouse gas emissions and reductions in climate adaptation. The bill says that we need to add 2 community seats to the board. Could someone please mute themselves because we can hear something in the background there.
Yeah, we're hearing a private phone conversation of some sort.
No, it's somebody is got the Moth Radio Hour on.
So please mute yourselves, everybody. Thank you. So as I said, this ad would add 2 seats from the community, especially from environmental justice communities, communities affected by these decisions, with and a second tribal representative or representative of an indigenous organization. So while that doesn't necessarily mean that they have any more influence than the other members of the board, at least it's a seat at the table, making these important decisions on the impact of these, where these facilities go. The next bill is an energy bill called an Act to Promote Offshore Wind Energy and Renewables. Rep. Fernandez and Senator Sear have put this forward. We chose this bill over a solar bill because although, as Roger said, we have many other bills, secondary bills that do address solar, we chose this wind bill that addresses wind because there was more bang for the buck, so to speak. So this bill would increase the establishment of wind energy at least 6,000 milliwatts by 2035, but does not impose any limits on the DOER. It establishes a board to bring in environmental and fisheries implementation and advice to the siting of these facilities. And of course, all the bidders have to address environmental and fisheries impact, including an ongoing monitoring plan for the bidding. So this is an important bill that would get us a lot more wind power for going forward. So up next, if I can see the spreadsheet again, public transit. No, I'm sorry, is forest bill. And I think Rick has been really helpful with these forest bills. So Rick, if you would jump in on this one.
I'm sure. I'm still trying to figure out why we're getting that audio over us all from the Moth Radio Hour. I don't know where that's coming from. I apologize if it's making it difficult to hear. So just very simply, first of all, this bill, my review was aided greatly by Betty Krikorian, who also went through this bill. And essentially what it does is, I'm very distracted by this running.
How about muting everybody?
I'm gonna mute all and then I'll mute all and then I'm gonna mute, and then I'll unmute. I'm gonna unmute Rick.
It was Jim Campen and he got it. It was Jim and he figured it out.
I don't know. Anyway, I'll keep going. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sign off and then sign back in again. If you think about forests in Massachusetts, 100 years ago, they were treated as resources. in all the meanings of that word, maybe not the way we think of it today. And the existing state rules and regulations treat them as such. They're a potential income producing property. They're there to be harvested and used by residents and so on of the state, not necessarily protected. This bill changes that language. It puts in place a board, a panel to guide.
Rick, it's really hard to hear you.
I know it is.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave and see what happens then.
No, why don't you mute everybody?
I'm
We
gonna,
already did that.
yeah,
And I thought it worked.
No,
it
it did
didn't.
not.
Rick, you must have an app. Tom, you're muted. Rick, you probably have an app running on your computer. You know, that's open and you don't even see it. Maybe it's covered up by other stuff.
Yeah,
Went away.
yeah, I think
He
Rick,
went away.
yeah, I think Rick logged off and he's logging on again.
Okay.
I don't see him on the participant list.
Arnie, this is Joel. Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
The education bill didn't have any supporting organizations. I'm pleased to see that it was Golden who submitted it, but is it just an oversight at the moment about who's supporting it?
We hope so. You know, we looked at the bill and you know, we've seen, you know, I've seen, you know, in our own community initiatives that for both solar and heat pump installations that there just are not, you know, that there is not the workforce available to do the type of work that needs to be done in the next 10 years, even remotely. And there's just no question that we've got to make sure people realize that these are where the green jobs are, and we have to provide, you know, the training to enable them to do that work.
It seemed that the Mass Teachers Association would be a natural supporter of that, and we happen to have a good in with that organization, so maybe we can get them on board for that one.
I guess I'm thinking this is very important because Golden was an obstacle to any carbon pricing legislation. If some advocacy organizations like ourselves or, you know, Climate Exchange could team up with him on this, it could make for cooperation with the.
I want to say something here. So with Golden, if Golden sponsored this bill or authored this bill, it's going to get a great deal of support. And it seems like a really good bill. And B, I think there's an opportunity for us to be the first supporting organization that shows up on Golden's doorstep.
Great idea, Michael.
Yeah.
That's
And
great.
you know, so
that's what I was getting to. Yes.
yeah. So let's let him know that it's in our top it's in our top priority stack.
Probably don't know our process on those things. So I would say, yep, put it on the agenda for the LT, the leadership team that meets every Monday, where we take up endorsements of things, co-signing, co-sponsoring, a webinar we have coming up in May, all that kind of stuff. We'll put it through that process, and I bet we'll get enough people to say, yeah, let's do that. We'll sign on.
I see Rick is back on.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I was just starting to talk about, if we can get it up here on the screen, an act relative to forest protection. What I was trying to say was 100 years ago, when the statute was written, forests were looked at as a resource to essentially be exploited, to be used. Maybe exploited is a loaded word, but certainly to be used as a source of income and all kinds of resources. And so the statutes were written accordingly. This law changes those statutes, removes a bunch of language. As Betty, who did the review, said, it gets pretty technical because you're down in the weeds of, this paragraph and that subsection and so forth. Because what they're doing is they're trying to create correct the existing language, but they're also trying to do some other things. They're putting in place an oversight board with a wide range of members and membership, including potentially people like those representing the National Plant Trust and others. So the point will be to take the existing statute and change it from one which viewed forests as a resource to forests as a source that needs to be protected, as a resource that needs to be protected, not harvested, and used to, among other things, help us protect wildlife and help us with carbon sequestration going forward. So leaving large areas of the existing forest intact as they are. And that's what this act is designed to focus on.
Is
Great,
this,
thank you, Rick.
Rick, can I
Is there a
ask?
question?
Yes, thank you. Is this Michael Kellett? Is he involved with this? I believe he is. Am I
Oh,
correct?
absolutely. He's a big promoter of this.
Totally.
And he'll be with us. He'll be with us in May on a deep dialogue. We'll be talking about this and related bills.
Cool.
Thank you, Rick. I'm glad you could get back in. The next one is a bill related to public transit, and I believe Paul Reisberg, you're going to jump in here.
Yep, thank you. Well, as Arnie said, the two big pieces are buildings and transport. And so this is addressing the transport part. There were 27 bills and we selected 2. And the 2 big pieces are just private car ownership and then the state fleets. And there's one bill dealing with each. So the first one here, Rep. Owen's bill, 2144, is the fleets, and it will require, starting in 2023, that all new purchases have to be electric. And then by 2030, the entire fleet needs to be electric. The commuter rail and the regional transit authorities have their own schedule. It's a little bit looser, and that by 2035, they need to be completely electric. And there's parts of the bill that will prioritize poorer communities and EJ communities in terms of which vehicles get replaced first, in terms of siting of garages and things like that. So it's a smaller piece. The public fleets aren't as big a piece as private cars, but it also sends a signal, right? People see buses all going electric. And it could be a resentment if people's private cars are being made to be electric while the state is still driving gas. The second bill, Pacheco's bill, deals with private cars. And the situation right now is Massachusetts, along with 15 other states, follows the California Resource Board, again, I forgot what it is, the CARB board standards. And this has had a big effect on what manufacturers in the US make, because it's a significant part of the US population. So California is coming up with a new standard. It'll be coming out at this December. And the governor of California has required that there be a complete ban on internal combustion engines in both cars and pickup trucks. So the bottom line, this will be a ban on all new sales of cars and pickup trucks that are not zero emissions by 2035. And it should be followed by the same 16 states. And so we're continuing to be a part of that. And we think this will probably be the most effective thing. I mean, there are bills that have incentives for electrification, but a hard ban seemed to be the best way forward. I mean, it's clear that electrification of cars is happening, but it's also clear that it needs to be accelerated. There's a few states that are also even earlier. Washington and Hawaii are going for 2030. European countries, there's 10 of them, they're going for 2030. So it's not unreasonable. And there's already been an effect. If you heard that how GM has decided they're going to stop making internal combustion engine cars starting in 2030. And that's probably in response to this sort of thing. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Paul. So, Roger, want to jump back in and lead us in our conversation about what we've just heard? Roger, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I was muted. I'm just trying to locate my presentation. Okay, there we go. And share screen again. A little stuff to do here. Okay, and there we go. And hang on just a second. Okay. All right. Let me just check to see if there we go. So we've just reviewed a set of what we think are our 8 top priority bills, and I'm going to just present a process for going forward to get all members' input into that and also into our secondary bills. Specifically around the second priority bills, I said there are like 53 of those or something, a lot of bills. We need input on, well, how many can we handle? But then specifically, which bills do we think should be included? There are bills that are number 2s in the building and energy, transportation, and EJ sectors, and also forest and natural land. So lots of bills in our main categories, but there are also some bills in some less commonly used categories. You had some divestment bills, folks trying to divest from retirement funds, fossil fuel investments. There's some other education bills. There's some climate adaptation bills that typically we haven't focused on in the past, but there's some interesting ones out there now. And there's at least one gas leaks bill. So there's a lot of stuff in these secondary things. What our proposal is would be to clean up our spreadsheet, send out all the bills, categorize with these brief summaries and links to the bill, and the fact sheets for folks who want to really dig deep, and then figure out a way to solicit member input on specific bills, pros and cons, things that look like your favorite bill that you haven't heard anything about yet, or bills that you think really definitely don't belong on our list. What about categories of bills? Should we be doing divestment? I mean, is that really in our purview or not? Should we be getting into adaptation, or is that really kind of like too much for us to take on right now? So some just general input around some of these unusual categories of bills. And what about the number of bills to include as a second priority? Can we handle 10, 20 or more? And if anybody has any interest in tracking specific bills and taking them on, that would be that's our Adopt a Bill program, which we'll be promoting. You just have to water them and walk them periodically, and they'll be fine. So then we would synthesize this input and then come back with a proposed draft of a list of first and second priority bills. So I guess I think we should open up for discussion that could include both comments on the list of 8 that we just went through. What do you see that's good there? Is it the right number? Are there things you would remove, things you really see missing? And what do you think about this process for getting your input on the rest of the set of bills that we had no time to talk about today? So I guess I'd like to open it up for discussion.
Thank you, Roger. If you're willing to, yeah, stop sharing. That would be great.
Well, I think it's very exciting. And I think that having this, I mean, Roger, the work that you guys do, I mean, it's just so impressive and very, and it's just so helpful. And I'm gonna talk in a couple of minutes about the kind of track. I'm trying to understand what's happening at a national level. And I can just say that you guys would be so much better at doing this than I am. So, because I mean, it's just the organizational, the filtering process gives us a clear agenda. I love the adopt the bill idea. I'm trying to think about whether I might do one myself. I think the sooner that we inform our allies, and in the case of the Golden Bill, make it clear to his legislative director that we are behind this, the more of this strength we'll be building in our coalition with legislators and climate champions within the State House. So really nice piece of work.
Second that.
I see, Glenn, you have a question. But if you have a question, you can put stack in the chat. That would be really helpful.
Yeah,
Thanks,
hi,
Glenn.
everyone. So not necessarily a question, but as far as the Adopt a Bill goes, on a recent meeting, Zoom call with Paul Mark, who's my representative. He's also one of the vice chairs on TUE, and he's also on NRA. And he offered to have his staff create an email blast list to notify people when bills come to either of those two committees for a hearing. And that's one of the things that you have to go back and check the legislature website constantly to see when these bills come up for a hearing. So if people are interested in signing up on Paul Mark's email blast list to get notified of when a bill will be coming up for a hearing, that's a key part of following and interacting with the legislature. And I'll get that email address to sign up and send that to Roger or mine or someone. Okay.
BJ.
First, I just want to really tell the legislative team they've done an awesome job sorting through all those bills. Take my hat off to you if I had one. However, I'm not sure you want more than 8 bills. That feels like a lot to be tracking and following, and then they sometimes get divided up and parts of them show up in other places. And so I think that number may be a lot. It would be good, I think, for us to go through the other bills to make sure you've got all the key things in there. But from what I heard, every single bill that you mentioned is one that I think we should be supporting because they're all key to making the roadmap a reality. Especially the education bill. I mean, I'm really dumbfounded that nobody else in our climate group seems to pick that one up as being key. I mean, to me, that is fundamental. And so you might even want to prioritize the 8 bills in terms of ones that need the most attention. So those are just my comments, but I would be interested in looking at the second priority bills just to make sure there isn't something else that should be considered key to the roadmap being implemented as quickly as possible.
Awesome. Alan Pierce.
I just want to second BJ and both a couple of points she made. Thanks to the team that did all this work. It sounds like an immense amount of work, but I was going to second her point. I'm wondering about having 8 priority bills, and I agree with her. That seems like a lot. We basically have been focused on one bill for the past couple of years, and we've had our hands full. If you are interested in rallying support for your priority bills, that means getting them. I'm sorry about my cat. I'm about to shoot this cat. But you're going to need to get them out to all the public hearings on each of those bills, submitting comments on each of those bills, contacting the reps about each of those bills. You're going to be doing legislative alerts. It sounds like very, very frequently. So I'm a little bit worried about that. Let me make a contrary point. Having just lived through what we've done and seen how active Senator Barrett has been, I'm a little surprised you don't have any Barrett bills here. Were there some? And, you know, if not, what's he up to? Because he's going to have momentum behind something he's doing. We know that. Just a couple of money related points. Are we going to hear something about the budget? Because for me right now, the budget for the next fiscal year is critically important. Your bills here are looking at a 2-year session, but the budget is a 1-year event. And boy, do we need some money to kick off what EEA needs to do, and all the agencies. I think there needs to be money and staffing, additional staffing for virtually all these key agencies. So I was hoping you would tell us something about that being a priority. And finally, maybe this is just me as a wonky lawyer. One of the things I know I want to be keeping an eye on this year are regulations. Given the climate bill that's just passed, there are going to be any number of agencies promulgating regulations to implement provisions of the bill that affect them. And I really do think we need to keep an eye on those and be commenting on them in many instances, making our members aware of them and how they can comment. It's a little bit different thing than we've been doing, but I think it's going to be critically important going forward.
Thank you, Alan. Are you volunteering?
Well, I personally am going to be keeping an eye as best I can on state regulations.
Awesome. So maybe we need a team. Maybe we need a team, and we'll bring that to the leadership team, because I agree, because you have to have enforcement or it doesn't mean anything. So I agree.
I can say a word about Senator Barrett. The problem was he took a shotgun approach. He's filed a very large number of bills, 8 or 9 just in transport, each to kind of narrowly focus. So as to your first comment, we don't want to be involved in too many bills. Barrett is sort of, to get on board with him, would be a very large number of bills. We're not sure why he took that approach, and I guess maybe we should be contacting him to see what the strategy is.
And another comment, that Barrett also filed his own market-based compliance mechanism carbon fee bill. We don't think it was as well thought through as the Green Futures Act that we talked about earlier. But obviously there's going to have to be, I think, a bill on the Senate side that's going to need to be reconciled with the Green Futures Act if it does pass. And I presume that would be Barrett's bill. But we think we thought we should be focusing on the Green Futures Act.
Speaking of Senator Barrett, he sent out in his report recently, he expressed a little anxiety or fear that the Baker administration may slow walk, S9. And so he listed 6 pretty immediate deadlines that, need to be met. And so I would think that, ECA may want to, play a role in, following those deadlines and see that they are in fact held, to, and if not, if Baker administration drags their feet, that, orgs like ours push, back and say, these deadlines need to be met, as opposed to just supporting specific bills. The implementation of the big bill that we got passed is wicked important. That was it.
Yeah.
I see Ed, you're a stack. You have a question or thought?
I think Betty had a.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Betty, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, you know, if we were meeting in person about now, we'd be going around the circle saying to each person, well, which bill would you like to take up? And, you know, would you like to follow this one or that one? And if I think this is a good opportunity for folks who are maybe more passive normally in terms of their membership activities. If we could encourage them to adopt a bill and say, look, people want something to do, here's something you can do. And it's important now to get this winnowing process underway at the beginning, which the legislative committee has done a phenomenal job doing that, but to continue it. And I think if we could encourage the membership as a whole to take on a little something, that would be worthwhile. And I think engaging for them. I mean, I know for myself back 2 years or so ago, I was kind of nudged into doing something at a meeting, and you know, it's led to a lot more involvement, and it's been satisfying also. So maybe that could happen with other folks. Of course, I don't know how you do that, but anyway, when you're not face to face.
That was a good nudge.
Yeah, we'll bring that to the leadership team for the next, and legislative team for the next discussion. Ed, go ahead.
Yeah,
We have, we're
on-
over time at 2, but go right ahead.
Let me follow up on Betty's comment. If you do adopt a bill, and it's fun to do this and follow this, if you're into that type of thing, and I think most of us are, to follow similar bills. So if you follow an EJ bill, look at other EJ bills, because very often they have overlapping provisions, and you end up seeing a number of legislators looking for the same result with different ways. So you end up developing legislative collaborations of legislators with each other. We have a whole list of all the bills that are climate related. It only covers 49 pages, but they're all searchable, et cetera. So there's a resource there that's available for people to do that. I stuck in the Barrett climate related bills in the chat, and you see, right, most of them are transportation related. There's one that is of drying your laundry in the outside, another one on waste, and then the 3 others are mostly sort of broader climate related bills. I think the EV bills arise out of the fact that he had proposed a lot of EV type bills, electric vehicle bills, in the last go around last January, and they didn't necessarily get caught up on the current legislation, so he's pushing those at this time. So those are all my comments. But adopt a bill and adopt a group of bills, because you really learn a lot about what's going on in the legislature.
Great. Okay. Well, I see we're at time. I think we need to have let time to have a couple of announcements. We will be circling back, as we've said, to these bills, and certainly be in touch with us if you on your own are looking through and want to follow a bill, or you have any questions for next steps on the other bills. So we have a couple of brief announcements. Michael, I believe you have a brief one about the deep dialogue on the federal picture.
Yes, I just want to say a couple of things. Take a minute about that. So I do a lot of posting on our Facebook page, and a lot of what that causes me to survey a variety of information sources, and a lot of things that I see is bad news and scary and upsetting. You know, when you see an ice shelf fall off of Antarctica that's the size of Rhode Island, that's definitely concerning. It's an era that we've had this terrible drought when it comes to climate action. in Washington, D.C. Had lots happened in Massachusetts, but in Washington, D.C., we've been going through a 4-year span of just terrible, terrible drought. Well, now we're getting really good news. And that's, we're getting good news at the federal level, and it's coming like a waterfall. And I've been working on trying to understand this a bit. I don't think I've done anything like what the legislative team has done here at the state level. And the deep dialogue that's coming up on April the 26th from 4 to 5:30, I'm going to try to share something about how to understand the scope of the federal legislation, how to track things, how to find things. Really, the resources are, Ed was referring to resources are available at the mass level. The resources that are available at the federal level are exponentially greater. And I do want to say that that getting involved at the federal level, which is the context in which we all exist, I think is critically important over the course of the next 19 months. That's the time between now and our next election. And Thomas Paine said that the times have found us in common sense. And that's what's happened here to the United States, that the times have found us as climate champions, and the times has found us as champions of democracy as well. So these are the things I'm going to be talking about on April the 26th, and I hope that you will be joining into that conversation.
Thank you, Michael. We're talking about the next little while. I'm thinking about something I heard. Oh, I know. It was an interview with Kim Stanley Robinson, the guy who wrote The Ministry of the Future. And we're all doing this thing about imagining, where do we want to get to? What's the future we want? And how do we get there? And somewhere in there, he talked about this is the decade. And I thought, okay, 10 more years. I can do this for 10 more years. I probably have 10 years. If we don't do it now, it's not going to get done, and we're all done. So, all right, I just feel such an urge to recommit and rededicate for now and for the next number of years until we've done what it takes. We can't do any less.
Thank you, Mayim.
Yes, thank you. Was there another announcement before we all sign off and enjoy this beautiful afternoon? The sun's coming out here in Hudson, Mass, anyway.
Tina, just 1 minute, if I may, on
Oh, yes, please,
Sound
Paul.
Democracy. Yeah, so, I come here every month and give a little update on Elders for Sound Democracy, and, to listen to what it takes to get a law going in Massachusetts, and Michael's perspective on how important federal legislative process and the national politics around climate change are becoming. We understand that the whole ability to do anything legislatively, to do anything governmentally, rests on a foundation of making sure that we have a representative democracy that works, and that we now know that the forces of suppression are strong and unrelenting, and the forces of voting rights and sound democracy need to be equally unrelenting. So that's what we're committing ourselves to as an organization, and as part of a huge pro-democracy network that's gelling in this country. We're moving forward on many fronts. We're creating a research database of resources on all various aspects of fair representation, voting rights, money in politics, and now the role of business as advocates, real and astroturfed, around voting rights issues. So now we're looking at, how do we discern, which corporations are really engaged. We saw the top corporations in Michigan just in the last 2 days really try to get out in front and not end up like Delta, where they kind of worked behind the scenes and then got had by the Republican legislature. So we really need to highlight and support that kind of activity. We're getting close to starting up environmental voter phone banks again. And I'm just going to put my email in the chat box, and just want you to know that that stuff is happening, and we would really welcome your interest and your engagement, because there are there's a lot of need for creative thinking about how we become an impactful part of this. So I'm going to stop right there. If there's time and inclination, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments, but I'm just going to put my email in the chat box now.
So Elders Stand for Fair Election has now morphed into Elders for Sound Democracy. Did I hear that correctly? Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And we have a broader and more long-term focus, more holistic focus, that there are many, many different dynamics that are at play here, and we have to pay attention to a lot of different things.
Love to see something about that in the newsletter.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone. Anything else? I think we should be wrapping up. What a super time we've had together. Grady, did you want to say something?
I was bidding farewell.
Oh, farewell, my brother. Fare thee well.
Good meeting.
Happy to
Bye, everybody. Thanks for all the hard work.
together.
Thank you very